I'm Mark Ciampach, the author of Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. In this lecture video, we will talk about Chapter 11, Basic Cryptography. One way to safeguard sensitive data is to scramble it through encryption. Even if attackers can break through the network or system defenses and get to these data files, they cannot read them if they are encrypted. An attacker would be forced to break the encryption as well, a difficult and a time-consuming task. In this chapter, we will talk about the encryption process and how it can be used to protect data and stay secure.
Chapter 11, Basic Cryptography, Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition. Our objectives in this chapter are to define what exactly cryptography is, to describe hash, symmetric, and asymmetric cryptographic algorithms, and then to list the various ways in which cryptography is used. Let's begin by attempting to define exactly what cryptography is, but first we'll look into why it is important. We've said from the very outset that having layers, multiple layers, is important in terms of information security. This goes back even as far as the very first chapter. Now, I might have a network that has firewalls and network intrusion detection system, all-in-one network security appliances, and those are all very important. However, if an attacker at some point was able to circumvent these security measures that I have in place and get to the data that I want protected, it would be great if I actually could have a second level of protection on that data itself, so that I have multiple layers through which an attacker has to get through in order to have the data in a readable format. This can be accomplished through the encryption of the contents of those documents, so that if an attacker were able to get through my firewall, my all-in-one network security appliance, and get to the data, then the attacker would be faced with yet another level that he or she would have to circumvent, which is the encryption of that data. And breaking encryption of that data can be a very difficult and a time-consuming task, and many times is simply not possible. So what exactly is cryptography? Cryptography is a process of scrambling, if you would, data so that it cannot be read. Technically, it's a science of transforming information into a secure form so that it can be transmitted or stored and that unauthorized persons cannot access it. Now, it's important to distinguish cryptography from steganography. Steganography hides the existence of data. Now, what appears to be maybe a harmless image can actually contain hidden data, usually in some type of message that is embedded within the image itself. And this can be done with images, with audio, with video files, can contain hidden messages. And this is often achieved by taking the data and then hiding it in unused portions of the file. This figure illustrates our hidden data, where the message to be hidden is coded in binary form, and then of course it is hidden between two headers. But we're really interested in cryptography. Cryptography dates as far back as Julius Caesar. He was one of the first and most famous ancient cryptographers. In his messages to his commanders, Caesar would often shift a letter of his message 3 places or more down in the alphabet. So, if we're considering English and not Latin, an A would be replaced with a D, a B replaced with an E, and so forth. Now, changing the original text into a secret message using cryptography is known as encryption. When Caesar's commanders received the message, they simply reversed the process. That is, they substituted a D for an A to change the secret message back to its original form. This is what is known as decryption. Data that is in an unencrypted form is called clear text data. Clear text data is data that is either stored or transmitted in the clear without any sort of encryption. Plain text data is different than clear text data. Clear text data that is to be encrypted is called plain text data. Plain text data is input into an encryption algorithm, and that algorithm consists of procedures based on a mathematical formula used to encrypt the data. A key is a mathematical value that is entered into the algorithm that actually produces the scrambled text, what we call ciphertext. Now, just as a key is inserted into a lock to open a secure door, in cryptography, a unique mathematical key is input into the encryption algorithm to create our ciphertext. Now, once the ciphertext is transmitted, it needs to be returned to clear text, so the reverse process occurs with the decryption algorithm. Here's an example of a cryptographic process in this figure. We start with the plain text. It goes through the encryption algorithm with the key, creates ciphertext. That ciphertext may be transmitted to a remote user, at which time it's certainly unreadable to both the recipient as well as to anyone who might intercept it. It remains that way until the recipient runs it through the decryption algorithm, giving the appropriate key, and the clear text appears again. Now, cryptography can provide 5 basic information protections. Cryptography can protect the confidentiality of information. It ensures that only authorized parties can view it. When private information is transmitted across the internet or stored on a file server, its contents can be encrypted, which allows only authorized individuals who have that algorithm key to see it. So cryptography protects the confidentiality of information. Cryptography can also protect the integrity of information. Integrity ensures that the information is correct and no unauthorized person or malicious software has altered it. Now, because a ciphertext document requires an algorithm key that has to be used first to open it, we can be ensured that cryptography protects the integrity as long as that key is protected. Cryptography can also help ensure the availability of data so that authorized users with the key can have access to it. Cryptography can verify the authenticity of the sender, because only those individuals who have the key should be able to decrypt and encrypt the document. I can rest assured that the person who actually sent the document is the one who has the correct key, for I would not be able to decrypt the document if the person had not encrypted it properly with the correct key. And cryptography can enforce non-repudiation. Now, repudiation is defined as denial. So non-repudiation is the inability to deny. Non-repudiation is a process really of proving that a user performs some sort of action, such as sending an email message or maybe a specific document. Non-repudiation prevents an individual from reneging on an action. The non-repudiation features of cryptography can prevent someone from claiming that they never received a list of new applicants to be hired, perhaps, or never even sent the list. Again, here are those 5 protections that we've talked about that cryptography can help with: the confidentiality, the integrity, the availability, the authenticity, and non-repudiation. We'll talk about basic cryptographic algorithms to begin, and the most basic is something known as a hash algorithm. Hashing is a process for creating a unique digital fingerprint for a set of data. This fingerprint can be called a hash, sometimes it's called a one-way hash, sometimes it's called a digest. This fingerprint represents the data. Although a hash is really considered to be a cryptographic algorithm, Its purpose is not to create ciphertext that can later be decrypted. Hashing, by its nature, is one way. The contents of a hash cannot be used to reveal the original set of data. So for that sense, we understand that hashing is primarily used for comparison purposes. A great example of a hash would be an ATM card. But let's consider first of all why a hash can be so effective. A bank customer using an ATM card has a personal identification number. We'll say that personal identification number is 93542. Now, this number is hashed, and the result is permanently stored on the magnetic stripe on the back of the ATM card. Now, when visiting an ATM, the customer is asked to insert the card and enter a PIN on the keypad. The ATM takes a PIN that's entered and it hashes it with the same algorithm that was used to create the hash that's stored on the back of the card. If the two hashes match, then the user can access the ATM. So here's our example of hashing with an ATM. Now, probably should say as an aside that not all ATM cards store the hashed PIN on the card. Some allow the user to change the PIN at any point in time, so thus the PIN obviously is not stored on the back of the card. But in this example, we're talking about a PIN that is stored on the back of a card. Here we see the card is entered the card reader. The individual enters their PIN on the keypad. The hashed value on the card is compared with the hashed value that is computed from the PIN that's entered, and if they're the same, then we can assume that the individual is who they claim to be. Now, a hashing algorithm is considered secure if it has these four characteristics. Number one, a fixed size. A hash of a short set of data should produce the same size a hash as that of a long set of data. That is to say, a hash of a single letter A may result in 32 characters. A hash of 1 million occurrences of the letter A should likewise result in a hash of a length of 32 characters. Obviously the hash itself would be different, but the length of a hash of one character should be the same length as that of 1 million characters or more. Secondly, hashes must be unique. Two different sets of data cannot produce the same hash. If it does, this is known as a collision. Changing a single letter in one lengthy set of data should produce an entirely different hash. If it does not, it's not a secure hash. Number three, original. It should be impossible to produce a data set that has a desired or predefined hash. I should not be able to take a document and from that document be able to create a predefined hash. And number four, it has to be secure. The resulting hash, as we've said before, cannot be reversed in order to determine what the plain text was. Hash is simply a digital fingerprint of that text. Now, hashing is often used to determine the integrity of a message or the contents of a file. That is to say, the hash serves as a check to verify that the original contents have not been altered. For example, when an email message is created, we also could create a hash based on that message contents. Then the email message and the hash could be sent to the recipient, or the hash may be posted somewhere where the reader can find it. Now, upon receiving the message, the recipient would likewise generate a hash on that message. If the original hash is the same as a new hash, we know the message has not been altered. However, if an attacker were to perform, let's say, a man-in-the-middle attack to intercept the data and change the message, even one character of the message, the hash values would not match. Now, there is a variation that actually improves security, and it's called the hashed message authentication code, HMAC. HMAC begins with a shared secret key that's in the possession of both the sender and the receiver. The sender creates a hash and encrypts that hash with the key before transmitting it with the original data. The receiver uses their key to decrypt the hash and then creates their own hash of the data, comparing the two values. This HMAC is actually widely used by Internet security protocols to verify the integrity of the transmitted data that's done during secure communications. Hash values are often posted on download sites to verify the integrity of files that are downloaded. A user then can perform a hash on a file after it's been downloaded, compare that value with the original posted value, and again, if they match, we know that the integrity of the file has been preserved. Here is how the man-in-the-middle attack can be defeated by hashing. And here's an example of posted hash values. We see that we actually can choose from several different types of hashes, and we'll look at some of these in just a moment. But that posted hash value verifies the contents of that file to be downloaded. I can download the file, run my own hash, look at the hash that's posted online, and if the two match, I know there has not been any alteration in the transmission process. Now, there are several common hash algorithms, and we'll look at several of these. Oh, let's also mention that these are the protections that are afforded by hashing cryptography. Confidentiality, no. Availability, authenticity, and non-repudiation, no. Hashing really just focuses on the integrity. These are the cryptographic hash algorithms that we'll look at. The first is message digest. This is a very common hash algorithm, and message digest, or MD, actually has three versions. Message digest 2, MD2, takes the plain text of any length and creates a hash of 128 bits long. It actually divides it into two parts and does some padding so that any sort of short message is 128 bits. However, this is all to say that MD2 is considered too slow today and it's very rarely used. MD4 was developed back in 1990 for computers that process 32 bits at a time. Now, MD4 takes plain text and creates a hash of 128 bits. However, there are flaws in the MD4 hash algorithm, so it has not been widely accepted. MD5, which was a revision of MD4, was created about a year later, and it was designed to address MD4's weaknesses. Now, much like MD4, the length of the message is padded, this time to 512 bits, and then the algorithm uses different variables of 32 bits in kind of a round-robin fashion to create a value that is compressed to generate the hash. However, some weaknesses have been revealed in the compression function, and it could potentially lead to collisions. So most security experts recommend that something other than MD5 be used as a secure hash algorithm. The secure hash algorithm, SHA, is a more secure hash than the MD family. Now, SHA is really a family of hashes. No weaknesses have yet been identified in the SHA secure hash algorithm. Whirlpool is a relatively new cryptographic hash function. It actually has received international recognition and adoption by several standards organizations, including ISO. Whirlpool is being implemented in several new commercial cryptographic applications. Now, Whirlpool is not going to be patented and is free for use for any purpose to anyone. Another is called the RIPEMD, RIPEMD. It won't go into the name of how it came about, but the primary feature of RIPEMD is there are two different and independent parallel chains of computation, the results which are then compared at the end of the process. Now, another use for hashes, besides simply ATM cards and comparing downloads, is in storing passwords. When a password for an account is created, that password is hashed and then stored. When a user enters her password to log in, that password is likewise hashed in the same way and compared with the stored hash version. So of course, if the two hashes match, then the user is authenticated. We've talked about this in terms of authentication and passwords in a prior chapter. We didn't actually call it hashing at the time since we hadn't studied hashing as of yet. But actually this is a process that goes on. Now, Microsoft Windows operating systems actually hash passwords in two ways. The first is known as the LAN manager, the LM hash. The LM hash, however, is not actually a hash, because a hash is a mathematical function used to fingerprint the data. The LM hash is technically called a cryptographic one-way function. That simply means that the LM hash is not actually a hash, although the name kind of leads us otherwise. However, what we need to remember is that the LM hash is considered a very weak function for storing passwords. So to address these security issues, there is a new type called the NTLM, New Technology LAN Manager Hash. It addresses a lot of the weaknesses of the LM hash and is considered a much stronger hashing algorithm. It might be noted that for Windows computers, we want to limit our exposure to LM hashes. Although the LM hash is still considered obsolete, Windows XP and Windows 2000 still compute and store the LM hash by default for compatibility with older systems if the password is 14 characters or fewer. So on older systems, the LM hash should be disabled. Now, Linux by default uses MD5 for hashing passwords. The Apple Mac uses SHA-1. Now, both Linux and Apple Mac strengthen their passwords by including a random sequence of bits as input along with the user-created password. And these random bits are known as assault, and they can make some types of password attacks much more difficult. Microsoft Windows does not use salts. Okay, we've talked about hashes and what hashes do and the different types of hashes. Let's move on now to talking about a second type of cryptographic algorithms. This is for encrypting and decrypting documents. Now, whereas a hash would encrypt, as we said, it's not designed to then take what's encrypted and try to decrypt it. That's not the purpose of a hash. Hash is just that digital signature, if you would. But now we're talking about the ability to encrypt a document and then transfer it to someone else, perhaps, who could then decrypt the document. The first type of cryptographic algorithms were known as symmetric cryptographic algorithms. Symmetric cryptographic algorithms use the same shared single key to both encrypt and decrypt a document. It's much like having a door with a lock and one key. That one key can unlock the door and open it up so you can enter the room. If someone else wants to likewise enter the room, they would have to have, again, that same key. As we've said, unlike hashing, in which the hash is not intended to be decrypted, symmetric algorithms are designed to encrypt and decrypt ciphertext. So, a document that's encrypted with a symmetric cryptographic algorithm, let's say by Bob, will be decrypted when it's received by Alice. Now, obviously, this means that the key has to be kept confidential. If an attacker were to obtain the key, They then could read the encrypted documents. And for this reason, symmetric encryption is also called private key cryptography. Here's a figure that illustrates this private key cryptography. We begin with our plain text that goes through the encryption algorithm, and we have a key there, 1347, etc., etc., that produces our ciphertext. Ciphertext is transmitted remotely to the user. When the user receives it, they take the identical key value, enter it into the decryption algorithm, and we have the plain text. Now, these symmetric algorithms can be classified into two broad categories based on the amount of data that is processed at a time. The first category is known as a stream cipher. A stream cipher takes one character and then replaces it with one character. It's a one-for-one. So as each character comes in, the stream cipher replaces it with a different character. Now, there are some different types of stream ciphers. There's something called a substitution cipher. There's something else called a monoalphabetic substitution cipher. This one is rather easy to break as well. Here's a figure that shows our stream cipher, where we've got, as each character comes in, one corresponding character comes out. Here we have the homoalphabetic substitution cipher. A single character is mapped to multiple ciphertext characters. There's also something called a transposition cipher, which is much more involved. A one-time pad is a variation. Instead of combining the cipher stream with plain text in this type of transposition cipher, a variation is to create a truly random key called a pad to be combined with the plain text, and this is simply known as a one-time pad. A one-time pad is simply a random string of numbers that, if it's kept secret and it's not reused, it can be considered secure. These one-time pads really are more theoretical in nature than practical. There are some advantages to stream ciphers. It's fast if the plain text is short, but there are disadvantages. It can consume a great deal of processing power if the plain text is long, and it may be prone to attack if the generating engine stream doesn't vary. The second category is that of a block cipher. Now, a stream cipher, as we said, works on one character at a time. A block cipher manipulates an entire block of plain text at a time. So the plain text message is divided into separate blocks, maybe of 8 to 16 bytes in length. Each block is encrypted independently. And then for additional security, these blocks can even be randomized as well. So here is a list of some of the protections that are afforded us through our symmetric cryptography. You can see that confidentiality, integrity, and availability can be protected, although the authenticity and non-repudiation not necessarily so. What about some practical implementations of symmetric cryptography? Data Encryption Standard, DES, was one of the first widely popular symmetric cryptography algorithms. It actually had a predecessor that dates back to the early 1970s, something developed by IBM called Lucifer. The key value is 56 bits. The U.S. government officially adopted DES as a standard for encrypting non-classified information. DES is a block cipher. However, DES, although it was once widely implemented, 56-bit key is no longer considered secure. It's actually been broken before, so it's not recommended for use. Triple Data Encryption Standard, 3DES, was designed to replace DES. Now, as you might gather from its name, 3DES uses 3 rounds of encryption instead of just 1. The ciphertext of one round becomes the entire input for the second iteration, and 3DES employs a total of 48 iterations in its encryptions. 3 iterations times 16 rounds. The most secure of 3 DES actually uses different keys for each round. Here's a figure that illustrates that. 3 DES with different keys. We begin with our plain text. It goes into encryption algorithm 1 with a key, creates ciphertext 1. Then that whole ciphertext 1 becomes input into encryption algorithm 2, and it has a different key, creates different ciphertext, and that ciphertext becomes the input into our encryption algorithm 3, which once again produces more ciphertext. Now, although 3DES addresses several of the weaknesses of DES, it really has been replaced by a more secure symmetric cryptographic algorithm, which is known as Advanced Encryption Standard, AES. This AES symmetric cipher was approved in late 2000 as a replacement for DES. It went through a very rigorous type of process. It performs 3 steps in every block of plain text, and it is viewed as being well secure even into the future. As of date, there have not been successful attacks logged against AES. There are some other algorithms as well. The Rivest cipher, the RC, the family of cipher algorithms, there actually are 6 of these, ranging from RC1 to RC6, although actually RC1 and RC3 were not formally released. IDEA, International Data Encryption Algorithm, dates back to the early 1990s, and it's used a lot overseas in Europe. There is a relatively new algorithm called Blowfish. It's a block cipher. It was designed to run efficiently on 32-bit computers. A later derivation of Blowfish, known as Twofish, is considered to be a very strong algorithm, although it's not used as widely as the Blowfish is. Now, our next category of asymmetric cryptographic algorithms is different from that of our symmetric cryptographic algorithms. And the reason for this was necessitated by the key. Remember, we said that with a symmetric cryptographic algorithm, it is absolutely essential that the key be kept secure among all users. Whoever's going to encrypt, whoever's going to decrypt, got to keep the key secure. And if we have multiple users, that kind of becomes a problem. But there's also another problem associated with it. How do you get the key to the person? Suppose Bob wants to send an encrypted message to Alice using symmetric encryption. He's got to be sure that Alice has the key to decrypt the message. But how does Bob get the key to Alice? I mean, he can't send it electronically through the internet. That might make it vulnerable to be intercepted by attackers. He can't encrypt the key and send it, because Alice would certainly have no way to decrypt the key. One of the primary weaknesses of symmetric encryption algorithm is the distribution and maintaining a secure single key among multiple users who oftentimes are scattered geographically across the city, state, or world. That has led to a different type of cryptographic algorithm known as asymmetric cryptographic algorithm, sometimes called public key cryptography. Asymmetric encryption uses 2 keys instead of 1. These keys are mathematically related. One is called the public key, one is called the private key. The public key is known to everybody, and it can be freely distributed. However, the private key is only known to the individual to whom it belongs. So when Bob wants to send a secure message to Alice, he takes Alice's public key and encrypts the message. Now, when Alice receives it, she uses her private key to decrypt the message. Here's a figure that illustrates that. Bob takes the plain text and, using Alice's public key, creates ciphertext, sends it to Alice. Alice then takes the ciphertext and uses her private key to decrypt. So we have two keys. Alice's public key that anybody in the world can have, but Alice's private key is the one that she must keep confidential. Now, there are several important principles regarding asymmetric cryptography. First, key pairs. Unlike symmetric cryptography, where we have one key, with asymmetric we have a pair of keys, two keys. Public keys by their nature are public. They can be freely shared. Doesn't matter. However, a private key absolutely has to be kept confidential and never shared. And both directions. Actually, asymmetric cryptographic keys can work in two directions. A document encrypted with the public key can be decrypted with the corresponding private key, as we said. But in the same way, a document encrypted with a private key can be decrypted with a public key. We're going to see how that is used in just a moment, but it's important to remember that it's a two-way process, if you would. Now, asymmetric cryptography can also be used to provide proofs. Let's suppose that Alice receives a message, an encrypted document, and it says that Bob sent this. But how can Alice be sure that the encrypted message wasn't viewed or altered by someone else while it's being transmitted? She knows that it can be checked that way because it's encrypted. But how can she know that Bob is actually the sender? You know, Alice's public key is widely available, so really anybody could use it to encrypt the document. Another person could have created a fictitious document, encrypted it with Alice's public key, and then sent it to Alice pretending to be Bob. I mean, while Alice's key can verify that no one has read or changed the document, it cannot verify the sender. However, proof can be provided with asymmetric cryptography by creating what's called a digital signature, which is like an electronic verification of the sender. Just as a handwritten signature in a paper document is proof that the signer has read and agreed the document, a digital signature is much the same way. However, it does provide some additional benefits. A digital signature will verify the sender. A digital signature confirms the identity of the person from whom the document originated. It also prevents the sender from disowning the message. The person who signed it can't later say, I disown it because the signature was forged. Also, it can prove the integrity of the message. A digital signature can prove that the message hasn't been altered since it was signed. The basis for a digital signature rests on the ability of the asymmetric keys to work in both directions. Remember, we said a public key can encrypt a document that can be decrypted with a private key, and a private key can encrypt a document that can be decrypted with the public key. So, here are the steps for Bob to digitally sign a message and send it to Alice. First of all, after he creates a memo, Bob is going to create a hash on it. Then, Bob will encrypt the hash with his private key. So the encrypted hash becomes the digital signature for the memo. Step 3, Bob's going to send the memo and the digital signature to Alice. Now, in step 4, when Alice receives them, she's going to decrypt the digital signature using Bob's public key, which will reveal the hash. Now, if she cannot decrypt the digital signature, she knows it didn't come from Bob. Only Bob's public key can decrypt the hash generated with his private key. And the last step is, when Alice hashes the memo with the same hash algorithm Bob used, and she compares the results to the hash she received from Bob, If the two are equal, Alice knows the message has not been changed, but if they're not equal, she knows the message has been changed since it was signed. And here's how that would look. Bob, the sender, again creates his memo, creates a hash of it, encrypts it with his private key, creating the digital signature, transmits it to Alice, who takes Bob's public key, decrypts. We have the hash. She runs it through the hash algorithm, and when they match, she knows that Bob sent the message and it was not altered. Now, public and private keys oftentimes result in confusion about what key do I use and when should I use the key. This table lists some of the reasons and actions and whose key to use. If Bob wants to send Alice an encrypted message, he uses Alice's key and he uses her public key. If Alice wants to read an encrypted message sent by Bob, she's going to use Alice's key, that is her private key. And we can see the other variations as well. The key is, no pun intended, the private key should never leave the owner. The private key, by its very nature, must be kept private by the owner. And here are some of the protections that we can have through asymmetric cryptography. And you notice now we can have confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and non-repudiation. Let's look at some of the popular asymmetric cryptographic algorithms. The first is RSA. This was published back in 1977 and actually was patented by MIT in 1983. RSA is the most common asymmetric, it's the most common asymmetric cryptographic algorithm, and it's actually the basis for several products. RSA multiplies two prime numbers and goes through several different computations. RSA is actually slower than some other algorithms, but it provides a strong degree of security. Elliptic curve cryptography, ECC. This was first proposed back in the mid-1980s. Instead of using two large prime numbers, as with RSA, elliptic curve cryptography uses sloping curves. One of the benefits of it is it uses less computing power than prime number based RSA, and the keys are smaller. Here's an illustration of how that ECC might look. There's also something called quantum cryptography. Quantum cryptography attempts to use the unusual and unique behavior of microscopic objects to enable users to securely develop and share keys. It doesn't depend on difficult mathematical problems. A relatively new asymmetric cryptographic algorithm is InTrueCrypt. It uses what's called a lattice-based cryptography. It's faster than RSA and ECC and may be more resistant to a certain type of computing attack. Here's an illustration of that lattice-based cryptography. But now, how do we use cryptography? What are some practical ways that we can implement cryptography to protect our data files? Cryptography should be used to secure data that needs to be protected, whether that data is in transport or that data is at rest. Now, we can apply this through either software or hardware. Let's begin by talking about encryption through software. Encryption can be implemented through cryptographic software that's running on a system. This encryption can be performed on a large scale using the file system, It can encrypt the entire disk, or it simply can be applied to individual files using the software to encrypt and decrypt each file. Let's talk about file and file system cryptography. Encryption software can be used to encrypt or decrypt files one by one, but this can be a pretty cumbersome process. So instead, more often groups of files, maybe all files in a specific folder, are to be encrypted, and this then can take advantage of some of the operating system's file system. Now, file system is a method for that is used by the operating system to store and retrieve and organize files. Now, if I'm going to protect individual files or multiple files through the file system, it can be performed using software such as Pretty Good Privacy, PGP. This is one of the most widely used asymmetric cryptographic systems for files and email messages on a Windows system. There is this commercial product, PGP. Likewise, there is an open source product called GPG, and this open source product runs on Windows, Unix, and Linux. Both PGP and GPG actually use both asymmetric and symmetric cryptography. The Microsoft Windows Encrypting File System. This EFS is a cryptographic system for Windows operating systems that uses the Windows NTFS file system. Now, EFS is tightly integrated with the file system in Windows, so file encryption and decryption is relatively transparent to the user. A file that's created in an encrypted folder or added to an encrypted folder is automatically encrypted. And when an authorized user opens a file, it is automatically decrypted. So when a file saves, then it automatically encrypts the data as it's written to a disk. EFS files are encrypted with a single symmetric key, and then that symmetric key is encrypted actually 2 times. There are some advantages. Users can set the encryption attribute for a file by the Advanced Attributes dialog box. Cryptography can also be applied not just to individual files or folders, but to entire disk, and is called whole disk encryption. One example of whole disk encryption is something known as BitLocker, which is found on Microsoft Windows 7 and Vista operating systems. BitLocker encrypts the entire system volume, including the Windows registry and even any temporary files. BitLocker prevents attackers from accessing data even by booting from another operating system, from a USB flash drive or CD-ROM drive. It also prevents someone who would pull the drive out and put it in another system from gaining access to it. So we've talked about encryption through software. Let's look at hardware encryption. Software encryption has a problem in that it's subject to attacks that exploit its vulnerabilities because it rests on the operating system, if you would. Now, if we could take cryptography and actually embed it in hardware, that provides an even higher degree of security. So hardware encryption cannot be as easily exploited as software encryption. Hardware encryption can be applied to USB devices like standard USB devices and standard hard drives. USB device encryption. We have so many instances of data being leaked out because a USB flash drive was lost or stolen and that data was not secured. We can have encrypted hardware-based USB devices, like a flash drive, that can be used really to prevent these types of attacks. The drive resembles a standard USB flash drive, but it has some significant differences. Encrypted hardware-based USB drives will not connect to a computer until the correct password has been provided. So inserting the USB flash drive into a computer is not going to give you automatic access to the flash drive. You have to enter the password. All data that's copied to the flash drive is automatically encrypted. The external cases of the drive are designed to be tamper resistant, so they cannot be disassembled. And even on some of these USB devices, administrators can remotely control and track the activity of devices, and a compromised or stolen drive can be remotely disabled on some of the higher end drives. Hard disk encryption. Just as an encrypted hardware-based USB flash drive will automatically encrypt any data that we put on it, a self-encrypting hard drive can also protect all files that are stored on it. When the computer or another device with a self-encrypting hard drive is powered up, the drive and the host perform an authentication process, and if it fails, the drive can be configured to deny access or even delete encryption keys, so all the data is permanently unreadable. TPM stands for Trusted Platform Module. It's a chip on the motherboard of the computer that provides cryptographic services. The TPM includes a random number generator, full support for asymmetric encryption, and all this is done in hardware and not through software on the operating system, so a malicious attack can't get to it. And TPM can really measure and test key components of the computer when it's started up to prevent the computer from booting if system files even have been altered. Even if the hard drive is moved to a different computer, user still has to enter a recovery password before they gain access to the system volume. And the hardware security module, HSM, is a secure cryptographic processor. It has an onboard key generator, key storage facility, accelerated symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Now, most of these hardware security modules are LAN-based appliances that can provide multiple services to multiple devices. Let's summarize what we've talked about in basic cryptography. We said that cryptography is the science of transforming information into a secure form while it's being transmitted or stored. Hashing creates a unique digital fingerprint that represents the contents of the original material, yet hashing is only used for comparison. Symmetric cryptography uses a single key to encrypt and decrypt a message, and symmetric cryptography can be divided into those that use string ciphers and those that use block ciphers. Asymmetric cryptography is called public key cryptography because it uses two keys, a public and a private key. Cryptography can be applied through hardware or software, and hardware encryption can't be exploited like software cryptography can. These were our objectives. We wanted to define cryptography, describe hash, symmetric, and asymmetric cryptographic algorithms, and to list the various ways in which cryptography can be used. That's Chapter 11, Basic Cryptography, Security Plus Guide to Network Security Fundamentals, 4th edition.